If this story gave you chills, imagine the ones you haven't heard yet. I post true horror encounters, creepypastas, and terrifying stories you won't find anywhere else. Don't just watch in the dark, join the community. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the bell so you never miss a scare, and be part of the ones who dare to listen till the end. Let's dive into the story. It was late October when I moved into the old house. My aunt had left town for a long trip, and she offered me her place since I needed somewhere cheap to stay for a while. The house wasn't in bad shape, but it carried that kind of tired silence that old homes always seem to have. The floors creaked in different tones depending on where you stepped, and the walls had faint cracks like they'd been holding secrets for years. I told myself it didn't bother me, that I just needed a roof over my head until I figured things out. But in truth, every night when I turned off the lights, I felt like the house was waiting for me to notice something I hadn't yet. At first, everything was normal. I'd wake up, head to work, come back in the evenings, make something quick to eat, and settle into the living room with my laptop. I kept most of the lights on downstairs out of habit, maybe because the silence was easier to handle when the house didn't feel like a cave. My aunt's neighbors were polite enough, though I barely saw them. The street was quiet, almost too quiet. By the third week, I knew the rhythms of the place, the pipes that groaned when the heat kicked in, the branches that scratched against the upstairs window when the wind blew a certain way. It was all harmless. At least, I thought it was. One Thursday evening, I got home a little later than usual. The sun had already dipped below the trees, and the house looked darker than I expected as I pulled into the driveway. I remember pausing before getting out of the car, staring at the upstairs window. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw a shape move behind the curtains. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe it was just a reflection of my headlights catching the glass. I shook it off, unlocked the door, and went inside. The air smelled faintly like dust and something else, like clothes that hadn't been worn in a long time. I told myself I was imagining it. Later that night, I was sitting on the couch scrolling on my phone when there was a soft knock at the door. I froze. It wasn't loud enough to be someone impatient, more like a testing knock. I walked slowly to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw a woman standing there. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a coat even though the night wasn't that cold. I opened the door just enough to hear her. She smiled politely and said she was a neighbor from across the street. She mentioned she'd noticed me moving in and wanted to welcome me. Her tone was warm, but her eyes lingered on the dark hallway behind me, almost like she was expecting to see someone else standing there. We chatted for a few minutes, mostly about my aunt and how she hadn't been around much lately. Then, almost casually, the woman said, "I thought I saw someone looking out the upstairs window earlier, but when I waved, they didn't wave back." She said it so simply, like she didn't realize how strange it sounded. My stomach tightened. I laughed lightly, told her I was the only one in the house, and she nodded, though her expression didn't change much. She said goodnight and walked back across the street. I closed the door and locked it, feeling an unease creep through me that I tried hard to push away. I stayed up later than usual that night, flipping through channels on the TV just for the background noise. Every now and then, I found myself glancing toward the staircase. The banister cast long shadows across the floor, and the upper hallway looked darker than it should have. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the neighbor probably mistook a shadow or reflection for a person. But when I finally shut off the lights and climbed the stairs to bed, I couldn't shake the thought of that upstairs window and what she thought she saw. I reached the top of the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the rail as if touching something solid might keep me steady. The hallway stretched out in front of me, lined with closed doors. I'd only been in the house a few weeks, but I already knew which rooms were rarely used, One was a storage room filled with boxes. Another was my aunt's old sewing room with a faint smell of fabric and dust. My bedroom was at the very end of the hall. I moved toward it, telling myself that once I was inside, I'd be fine. Just shut the door, get under the covers, and forget about everything. I pushed my bedroom door open and flicked on the light. The familiar yellow glow spread across the room, settling over the dresser, the stack of books on the nightstand, and the half-open closet. Everything was exactly the way I'd left it. I tried to relax, but something pulled at me. Out of habit, I looked toward the smaller hallway that connected my room to the bathroom. A thin string dangled from the ceiling there, the kind attached to old lights you had to pull. My aunt had warned me once that the bulb barely worked and gave off a weak, bluish glow, so I'd never bothered using it. But tonight, the light was on. I froze in the doorway. My chest prickled with heat as I stared at that dim glow seeping across the floor. The string swayed slightly, like it had just been pulled. My first thought was ridiculous. Maybe the bulb had flickered on by itself. It was old. Maybe the wiring was bad. But as I stepped closer, I realized how much force it took to get that light to click on. You couldn't just brush against the string. Someone had to pull it. My mind jumped back to what the neighbor said about the window. I wanted to believe she was mistaken, but now it felt like her words were echoing right in this room. My throat went dry. I reached up and yanked the string. The light went out with a soft snap. The darkness that rushed in felt heavier than before, so I quickly turned on the bedside lamp. I sat down on the bed, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, though I couldn't read a word. My eyes kept flicking toward the bathroom hallway. Minutes dragged by. The house settled around me, creaks rising and fading, pipes rattling faintly somewhere inside the walls. Every sound made me tense, wondering if it was the house or someone moving. I told myself to be logical. I checked the locks downstairs. I hadn't seen any broken windows. There was no reason to think anyone else was here. Still, my gut wouldn't calm down. I decided to do one more walk through the house, just for peace of mind. I stepped into the hallway and made my way to the spare bedroom first. I hadn't opened the door since moving in, but something about it called to me. My hand shook slightly as I turned the knob and pushed it open. The air inside was colder, musty, like the room hadn't been touched in years. My aunt's old bed sat against the far wall, blankets piled neatly on top. Boxes were stacked along the side, and a small chair leaned crooked against the dresser. I almost turned to leave when I noticed something under the blanket on the bed. At first, it looked like a lump of folded fabric. But the longer I stared, the clearer the shape became. My breath hitched as I realized it was the outline of a body, lying still beneath the covers. I froze, my feet glued to the floor. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it could be heard. Slowly, the blanket shifted. A head rose up, and eyes met mine, wide, unblinking, watching. I stumbled backward, my heel catching the floorboard, sending out a sharp creak. The man in the bed sat up fast, too fast for someone who'd been sleeping. He had been awake, listening, waiting. I turned and bolted, the sound of footsteps pounding the floor behind me. The hallway blurred as I sprinted, my socks slipping against the old wooden floor. I nearly crashed into the wall as I grabbed the banister and threw myself down the stairs. The man's footsteps were right behind me, heavier and faster than mine. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My only thought was to reach the front door before he reached me. I hit the last step and lunged forward, fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the key I'd left in the knob. I twisted it hard, yanked the door open, and burst out into the cold night air. My lungs burned as I stumbled down the porch steps and into the yard. Behind me, I heard the door slam open and the man's feet pounding after me. Across the street, the neighbor's porch light glowed faintly, a small beacon in the dark. I bolted toward it, nearly tripping over the uneven sidewalk. My chest ached, but I didn't stop until I was on her steps, slamming my fists against her door. "Help! Please, let me in!" I shouted, my voice cracking. It only took a few seconds before the door swung open and the woman from earlier stood there, startled but quick to pull me inside. She locked the door behind us as I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. "What happened?" "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "There's someone in the house," I managed to say. "He was upstairs. He chased me." Her face went pale. She hurried to the phone on the counter and dialed. While she spoke to the dispatcher, I stood by the window, peeking through the blinds. The street looked quiet, too quiet. My house sat there with its dark windows, still and silent, like nothing had happened. The front door was closed now. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the entire house top to bottom, every room, every closet, even the attic. Nothing. No signs of forced entry either. They asked if anything was missing, but I couldn't think of a single thing out of place. The blankets on the bed were the only evidence I had, and even then, I wondered if they'd believe me. One officer suggested maybe it was a squatter who'd been hiding out and fled once I caught him. Another hinted it could have been stress playing tricks on me. But the neighbor backed me up. She insisted she'd seen movement in the window earlier that evening. That was enough for them to take me seriously, though it didn't bring me much comfort. When they left, I couldn't bring myself to go back inside the house. The thought of walking into those dark rooms made my skin crawl. I stayed with the neighbor that night, lying awake on her couch, listening to the occasional car roll down the street. Every sound made me jump. Every creak in the walls felt like footsteps. The next morning, with daylight spilling across the street, the house looked almost ordinary again. Harmless. But I knew better. I couldn't shake the image of that man's eyes staring at me from the bed, like he had been waiting for me to notice him. I called my parents and told them what happened. They offered to come down, help me check the place, maybe even change the locks. I agreed, though deep down, I wasn't sure locks were the problem. Still, having them there made me feel less alone. We spent hours going through each room, taking inventory of anything valuable. Nothing was missing. Nothing at all. That was what unsettled me the most. If the man wasn't there to steal, then why was he there? By evening, my parents left, urging me to stay cautious and call if anything else happened. I promised I would, though I already knew I wouldn't last long in that house. I couldn't. The silence inside was heavier now, charged with the memory of what I'd seen. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, every light in the house blazing, staring at the hallway where that faint string hung from the ceiling. I couldn't stop wondering, how long had he been there before I found him? And how many nights had I slept, unaware that he was only a wall away? The next night was worse. Even with every light turned on, the house felt hollow and restless, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I tried sitting in the living room with the TV running, volume higher than usual, hoping the noise would drown out my nerves. But every so often, I'd find my eyes drifting toward the staircase, imagining the sound of slow steps coming down. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. Sleep wasn't going to happen here, not after what I'd seen. I grabbed a blanket, went out to my car, and reclined the seat as far back as it would go. The driveway was cold and silent, but at least in the car, I could lock the doors and see all around me. I drifted in and out of light sleep, startled awake by the smallest noise outside. Once, around 3 in the morning, I thought I heard the faintest thud from inside the house, but I refused to look. In the morning, the thought of staying even one more day felt unbearable. I called my aunt, told her everything, and asked if she minded me leaving early. She didn't argue, just sounded concerned. She told me to pack up whatever I brought and stay with my parents until I figured things out. The relief I felt was immediate. I told myself I'd get through one more night, then I'd be gone. But packing that evening was harder than I expected. Every room I stepped into felt charged, like someone was watching from just out of sight. I moved quickly, stuffing clothes into bags and collecting my things. When I entered the sewing room, I noticed the smell stronger than before, stale and musty, mixed with something sharper, almost metallic. It stopped me in my tracks. I glanced around, but nothing seemed different. The boxes were still stacked, the chair still leaning. I hurried out, refusing to linger. By the time I finished, it was close to 11. I set my bags near the door so they'd be ready in the morning, then went upstairs for one last shower. I kept the bathroom door open, the sound of the water echoing into the bedroom. As the steam filled the room, I thought I heard something faint, like the sound of floorboards shifting under weight. I froze, shampoo still in my hands, listening. The noise came again, slow and deliberate, right outside the bathroom door. Hard hammering, I shut off the water and stood there dripping, straining to hear. Silence. I grabbed a towel, wrapped it around myself, and pushed the door open. The bedroom was empty. The light on the nightstand glowed softly, illuminating the bed and the closet. Everything looked normal. Still, I felt the prickling certainty that someone had been standing there just moments ago. I dressed quickly, deciding I'd finish the night in the car again. As I bent to unplug my phone charger, something caught my eye. The string light in the small hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom, the one I'd sworn off, was swaying gently back and forth. The bulb itself was off, but the string moved like it had just been pulled. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. For a long moment, I stared, waiting for something to happen. Then, forcing my legs to work, I snatched up my phone and bolted downstairs. I left the lights on, left my bags by the door, and locked myself in the car again. My reflection in the windshield stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, while the house loomed behind me, lit up like a stage with no audience. Sleep didn't come at all. I sat awake until dawn, gripping the steering wheel, glancing at the upstairs windows. Once or twice, I thought I saw movement behind the curtains, but I told myself not to look too closely. Whatever was in there, I didn't want to see it again. By morning, my decision was made. I wasn't going back inside, not even to grab my bags. I figured I could replace clothes and chargers. What I couldn't replace was peace of mind. My parents were already expecting me, so I texted them that I was on my way and started the car. The engine's low rumble felt like a lifeline pulling me out of the nightmare. But as I backed down the driveway, I hesitated. My aunt's house stood there with every light still on, blinds pulled tight, silent in the gray dawn. It looked like it was waiting. My bag sat just inside the front door, plain as day through the glass. I hated the thought of leaving them behind, of giving that place any reason to feel unfinished between us. Against my better judgment, I pulled back in. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside quickly, and grabbed the handles of the 2 duffel bags. The air inside was colder than it should have been, like the heat had shut off overnight. I kept my eyes on the door, refusing to glance upstairs. As I turned to leave, I heard it, slow creaking, floorboards bending under weight. From above, my stomach dropped. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could take a step, the sound stopped. The house went silent again, so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I forced myself forward, yanked the door open, and stumbled back out into daylight with the bags clutched tight. I didn't lock the door behind me. I didn't look back. I just threw the bags in the trunk, slid behind the wheel, and drove. The farther I got, the easier it became to breathe, though every mile still carried a tension that didn't quite leave me. At my parents' house, the comfort was immediate. The smell of coffee, the clutter of familiar things, the way sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, it all felt safe. For the first time in days, I let myself relax. We sat together, and I told them everything. They listened quietly, never once making me feel like I was overreacting. When I finished, my dad said he'd go back with me later in the week to check things out, maybe even set up cameras. That night, lying in my old bedroom, I finally slept. But the dreams were vivid. I saw the man again, sitting on the bed, his eyes locked on mine. In the dream, he didn't chase me. He just sat there, waiting, like he knew I'd come back eventually. I woke up with a start, heart racing, but I was in my parents' house, safe. I told myself it was just a residue of fear, nothing more. The next day, my dad suggested we head back to the house during daylight, just to grab anything I'd left and double-check the locks. I agreed, though I dreaded walking through that door again. When we arrived, the house looked ordinary under the sun, almost harmless. But stepping inside brought it all back instantly. We moved from room to room. Everything was untouched. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. My bags, the lights, even the half-folded blanket on my bed, everything was in place. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined it all, if my fear had spun shadows into people. But then I saw the string light again, the one between the bathroom and the bedroom. It was swaying gently, even though neither of us had touched it. I pointed it out to my dad, but by the time he looked, it had stopped. He shrugged, said it was probably just air movement from us walking. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew better. We left soon after, and as I pulled the door shut, I felt a strange certainty. Someone had been living there. Maybe they still were, watching us even then. The first few days back at my parents' house were calm. Too calm, almost. I tried to convince myself the whole thing was behind me, that I'd left the fear behind with the old house. But small things kept tugging at me. At night, I'd wake up convinced I'd heard footsteps in the hallway, only to find the house silent. When I drove into town, I sometimes noticed a car behind me that seemed to linger too long, turning wherever I turned, before finally peeling away. I told myself it was coincidence. It had to be. On the fourth night, I ordered takeout to my parents' address. When the delivery driver pulled in, I stepped outside to meet him. As I signed the receipt, I noticed another car parked a few houses down. Dark, engine running, headlights off. I squinted, trying to see inside, but the windows were tinted. The driver didn't move, didn't roll down the window, didn't do anything. Just sat there. When I went back inside, I mentioned it to my mom, half joking, trying not to alarm her. She frowned and looked out the window, but by then the car was gone. "You're just on edge," she said softly. I nodded, though unease crawled back in. That night, I set my phone on the nightstand and tried to sleep. Sometime after 2, I woke up to the faint glow of the screen. A notification blinked, "Find my iPhone location shared." My heart lurched. I hadn't turned that on. I hadn't shared my location with anyone. My hand shook as I opened it. The dot marked my exact spot, this house, this room. I clicked through the settings, but no name appeared, no contact. Just unknown. I sat there in the dark, staring at the glowing screen until I finally shut it off and shoved it under the pillow. Sleep never came back. The following day, I decided to drive out just to clear my head. A long stretch of highway might calm me down, I thought. But as I merged onto the main road, I caught sight of a car sliding into the lane behind me. Dark sedan, tinted windows. The same kind I'd seen near the house. My pulse quickened. I told myself not to panic. It was just another driver. I drove normally at first, then changed lanes. The car followed. I slowed slightly. It slowed. When I turned off the highway onto a quieter back road, it turned too. That was all I needed. My hands tightened around the wheel as I pressed harder on the gas. The empty road stretched ahead, trees blurring by, and still the car hung back, close enough that I could feel its presence, but not so close that I could see the driver. I remembered the night in the old house, running down the stairs, hearing footsteps right behind me. The same fear was back, pounding through my chest, urging me forward. I made a sharp turn down another road, gravel crunching under the tires, and the car's headlights swung after me. I knew I couldn't lead them back to my parents. I couldn't risk that. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its lights glowing faintly through the trees, and I pulled in fast, parking near the entrance. The car slowed on the road, paused, then kept going. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, watching the taillights disappear into the night. Inside the station, I bought a coffee just to steady myself. The cashier barely looked at me, and for a second I envied how normal his night was, how ordinary it all seemed for him. I wanted that normal back. But deep down, I knew normal was gone. When I finally drove back, the streets were empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was in that car hadn't given up. They were watching, waiting, just like the man in the bed had. That night, I couldn't settle. My parents had gone to bed hours earlier, but I stayed downstairs on the couch, the TV flickering with some late-night rerun I wasn't really watching. Every time headlights flashed across the window from passing cars, my stomach tightened. I kept glancing at my phone on the coffee table, half expecting it to light up again with that strange location message. Around 1 a.m, I stood to get some water. As I passed the front window, I paused. The street was quiet, but parked across from the house was a dark car. Same shape, same tinted windows. It didn't belong to any of the neighbors. I ducked back, heart pounding, and tried to peek without being seen. The car's engine was running. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew someone was in there. I considered waking my parents, but something inside me resisted. They'd tell me to call the police, and I wasn't sure what I'd even report. "There's a car outside" didn't sound urgent enough. So I sat back down, every nerve in my body alert, waiting. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then, without warning, the car's headlights flicked on, and it drove slowly down the street until it vanished. Relief never came. Instead, the silence grew heavier, more suffocating. I went upstairs around 3, too exhausted to stay awake any longer. I closed my door, locked it, and crawled into bed. Just as I started to drift, a soft knock echoed through the house. Not on my door, on the front door downstairs. I sat up, frozen. Another knock followed, slow and deliberate. My parents didn't stir. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial, but then silence returned. I waited, barely breathing, ears straining for any sound. After what felt like forever, I lay back down, though sleep never came. The next morning, I found something on the porch. A slip of paper tucked under the doormat. No envelope, no name, just 3 words written in shaky block letters, "I see you." My hand shook as I showed it to my parents. They were horrified, demanding we call the police immediately. An officer came, took the note, and asked questions, but there wasn't much to go on. He promised extra patrols in the neighborhood, which sounded reassuring on the surface. But deep down, I felt the same dread I'd felt in that house. Whoever this was, they weren't going to stop. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my room. I sat up on the couch again, the front door in view. Around midnight, I heard something faint from the backyard, a crunch of leaves, soft but distinct. I killed the TV and sat in the dark, listening. Another crunch, closer this time. I crawled to the window and peeked out through the curtains. At first, all I saw was the faint outline of the yard, shadows stretching across the grass. Then movement. A figure slipping along the fence line, head low, moving deliberately. My breath caught in my throat. I ducked back, hard hammering, and reached for my phone. Just as I unlocked it, another sound came, a metallic rattle at the back door. Someone was trying the handle. I wanted to scream for my parents, but fear pinned me down. Instead, I pressed myself against the wall, phone clutched tight, ready to call 911. The rattling stopped. Silence. For a few moments, I thought maybe they'd left. Then came the sound I'll never forget, my name. Spoken low, almost a whisper, right outside the door. My first name, and then my last, like they were savoring it. I dropped the phone in shock, the screen clattering against the floor. Whoever this was, they didn't just know me. They had been watching for a long time. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My name hung in the air like it had been carved into the walls. Hearing it spoken like that, soft, deliberate, stretched out, was worse than any scream. It meant whoever this was knew me, had been studying me long enough to feel entitled to say it aloud. I scrambled for my phone on the floor, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it again. I dialed 911 with clumsy fingers, whispering into the receiver that someone was outside trying to get in. The operator's voice was calm, asking for details, but I couldn't give her much beyond "he's here. He's at the door. He knows my name." As I spoke, the quiet shifted. The footsteps moved, circling the side of the house. The operator told me to stay on the line, but every instinct screamed that I couldn't just wait. I ran to my parents' room, shaking them awake. My dad grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the bed, and my mom pulled me close, her face pale with terror. The three of us crept to the hallway, the phone still pressed to my ear. The footsteps scraped against the back porch, then silence again. My dad whispered for us to stay put while he checked, but I clung to his arm. I couldn't bear the thought of him going out there alone. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop outside, officers spilling out with flashlights drawn. They moved quickly around the yard, their beams slicing through the darkness. But whoever had been there was already gone. The officers found no one, no footprints, nothing but the faint impression of someone having stood at the back door. They promised to keep an eye on the area, to increase patrols, but I could see in their faces they knew how these things often went. Unless he came back while they were here, there wasn't much they could do. When they finally left, the house felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. My parents tried to reassure me, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. They didn't say it, but I knew they were wondering the same thing I was, if this man had followed me from the old house, if he had been living there all along, waiting, watching, until I noticed him. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here, not when he knew this address. I packed a small bag, just essentials, and told my parents I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere far enough that he couldn't follow. They protested, of course, but eventually agreed. Fear had settled into them too, and they understood. Driving away, I watched the familiar streets fade in the rearview mirror. Every car that passed made me tense, every set of headlights a threat. I didn't know where I was going exactly, only that distance felt like the only protection left. Even now, I wonder how much he knows. My name, my face, my habits, what else had he memorized? How long had he been hiding just out of sight, waiting for me to notice? Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see him again. Not running, not chasing, just sitting there, under the blanket in that bed, his eyes locked on mine like he already knew the ending. And maybe that's what terrifies me most. That no matter how far I drive, how many doors I lock, he's still out there, watching. Waiting for the night I finally forget to look.